Welcome to Vendetta Sports Media. My name is James Herrick, and today I'm here with a film study on Jon Jones. This should be a good one because Jon Jones is one of the best fighters in UFC history, so there are a ton of cool things we can look at when we're analyzing some of his film. Now, if you are not aware of what I do here on these film studies, basically what I do is I'll watch film on a fighter and then look at two strengths and two weaknesses from their game. And then when I'm finished with that, I will craft some game plans for how that fighter can win a fight and what their opponents can do to potentially beat them. Now, before we get into the film, I do want to throw out a quick little disclaimer almost, just because with Jon Jones, it is a little bit more difficult to look at some of his film because he has been out for so long and he does have so many fights in the UFC. And for this, I basically looked at his 5 most recent fights because I think that gives us the best representation of what we're going to get in the octagon this Saturday. It's still a little tough to tell because those fights still happened a while back, but I do think, looking at his most recent fight against Dominic Reyes is a little bit more valuable than going all the way back to when he won the belt against someone like Shogun Rua. So I tried to look at the more recent fights in comparison to some of the older ones. So just be aware, since I know he has a lot of film out there, and I wanted to address that just in case there were any questions on that regard. Now that that's out of the way, it's time to get started and look at some film. So the first strength that I noticed for Jon Jones was that he's always setting up his strikes. And I think this is indicative of his high fight IQ. Jon Jones is very good at a lot of things, but I think one of the things that he's very underrated in is how smart he is. Jon Jones has a very high fight IQ, and he sets up all his strikes to help minimize the risk and maximize the outcome of these strikes that he lands. And he does this in 3 ways. He does this by mixing kicks to all 3 levels of the body. He does this by utilizing feints, and he does this by utilizing hand fighting. So we're going to briefly look at some examples of all 3 of those to show how he sets up some strikes. And we're going to start with the kicks. So with Jon Jones, he is very good at kicking, right? Very long legs, great kick game, and he has a lot of different kicks in his arsenal, whether that be your standard leg, body, and head kicks, but he also mixes in oblique kicks, side kicks, spinning kicks, whether that be your spinning heel kick or your spinning back kick. I've even seen him throw some question mark kicks and some hook kicks, right? So he has a lot of different kicks in his toolbox, and he mixes those up very well. And he attacks leg, body, and head to set up strikes to the other levels. So what I mean by that is he'll be attacking your legs to where you think he's going to kick you in the legs, and then he kicks you in the body or head, or vice versa, obviously. But he mixes to all 3 levels to make it hard for opponents to defend against any singular level. And the best example of this was his knockout against Daniel Cormier, which we're going to look at, but we're also going to look at another example against Dominic Reyes, where he sets up a leg kick by using a head kick. So those are the 2 clips that we're going to look at for this example. Against DC, we see Jon throw a lot of teeps up the middle that land right in Daniel Cormier's midsection. This is a good example here, as Jon catches DC walking forward and buries those toes right in his stomach. Now, the constant threat of the kick to the body eventually opens up Jon to take that kick upstairs and land a massive head kick on DC. And then when we take a look at the freeze frame of this, we can see that DC's hands are dropping low to defend that body kick, but he cannot get them back up in time to block that head kick. Now we're going to look at the inverse of this, where Jon throws a really good head kick, but Dominic Reyes is able to block it, so he switches that over to a leg kick and easily lands the leg kick. Once again, we look at the freeze frame, and in this one, we can see Dominic Reyes put his hands up to block the head kick, while Jon goes low, landing the leg kick. Now, I mentioned earlier that Jon uses feints to set up the strikes that he lands as well, and that's what we're going to look at next. Now, if you're unaware of what a feint is, it's basically just a fake strike or a fake movement that is used to set up some offense of your own and get a reaction from your opponent. If you would like more, information on feints, a really good video to look at is my film study on Ciryl Gane, because I spoke about feints a little bit more in depth in that one. We're not going to go as deep here, but I do want to acknowledge some of the ways that he uses feints to set up strikes, and that's exactly what we're going to look at with the next set of film. In this clip, the feint that we're seeing is Jon's lead hand movement, where he's really showing that jab. And that gets the reaction from Santos, where Santos is real active in parrying it, but he also steps back to defend that jab. The issue is that when Santos steps back due to the reaction, he accidentally trips up against the cage, and that gives Jon some opportunities to land some strikes because he got out of position due to the feints. Now this is a little more standard and a little less chaotic, but here, similar concept where we just see Jon throw out that jab feint, but he's actually going to dig to the body with that right hand and land a powerful body shot. In this one here, we see Jon use the jab feint again, and this time Santos backs all the way up to the fence. The thing is that Jon does not wait for him to get off the fence. As his back is up against the fence, Jon throws the spinning back kick and absolutely blasts him. Since Santos' back is flat up against the fence, he really can't move left or right to avoid this, so he gets hit and gets hit hard. Now the last thing that Jon does to set up some really strong offensive strikes is he'll hand fight. And what I mean by that is you'll often see him reaching out and grabbing hands with his opponent. So both his hands are extended and both fighters are grabbing each other. Now, for a lot of fighters, this may not be the most offensive position. Some guys are able to strike from that position very well, however. Jon Jones is someone that is able to do that because he doesn't solely focus on his hands when he's striking. So he can use his hands and go out and grab both of his opponent's hands, and then he can hit you with a kick. Or he can turn that extended arm over to an elbow. So since he has such a diverse set of offensive tools, he can then utilize the hand fighting a little bit more to set up some more creative kicks or some elbows. So that's what we're going to look at with the film in this next section. So right here, when Jon and DC hand fight, Jon's able to get control of those hands of DC, and that gives him a perfect angle just to throw this knee right up the middle. And then when you look at the freeze frame, you can just see the wide open midsection of Daniel Cormier. In this one, very similar, we see Anthony Smith reach out with both of his arms, and then the second he reaches out, that front kick comes right up the middle and blasts him in the chin. Now, about 10 seconds later, Jon goes back to the same concept where he's sticking his hands out, and when Anthony sticks his out, Jon reacts with a big spinning elbow that lands. Now, we spent a lot of time on that first strength, but I hope you enjoyed some of the different ways that he sets up strikes. But moving on, we're going to look at his striking defense. Jon Jones has impeccable striking defense, especially to the head. So what Jon will do is he'll really keep one hand very high, guarding his chin and his ear, and then he will extend with his other hand, and that creates a very hard position to land to the head. Because his arm is so long, he can manage the range, and he still is keeping that chin safe, and then he can use his shoulder as well to roll with strikes. So he does a lot of different things, but it starts with his hand up, his hand out, and then from there he can roll to either side and help minimize damage even if he does get hit, but most of the time he's just getting hit in the shoulder when he adds a roll to that original starting point with his defense. Now, before I added this part to the video, I did Google his striking defense numbers just to make sure I was kind of on point here. And if you're curious, Jon does only get hit with 34% of the significant strikes that his opponents attempt, and that counts all head, body, and leg shots. So I think that goes to show exactly just how good he is at defending those head strikes. So let's look at some examples of how he is able to do that so well. In this example, we see Jon get pressured, and he puts that right hand up, and that left hand goes out. And then in the freeze frame, you can see Jon's got that right hand up, blocking the chin, and that left hand is posting on Dominic Reyes' face, which manages range, and it also prevents Dominic from further pressuring. Now in this example, we see Jon get his hand up to block this first shot from Dominic, but what's impressive is the slight movement in his head to avoid the second shot. You can barely see it, it's hard to see, but he moves his head just enough to get it off the center line. Now, it can be a little bit difficult to find weaknesses for Jon Jones because he is so good, but I think I found some. And the first thing that I want to look at is the downside to his, impeccable striking defense. And that may sound like a strange sentence, but since Jon is so good at defending the head, we rarely see him look to land counter strikes. when he is pressured, he very rarely will sit down on a counter shot, and he will, almost never throw a counter shot while moving backwards. Instead, he'll just rely on that really slick striking defense to not get hit, which is a positive, right? But the issue comes when he allows guys to pressure him heavily, because once he starts moving back and starts being in a defensive mindset, he really doesn't switch that offensive at all. So guys can pressure him, push him up against the cage, throw some flurries of strikes, and he really just gets very, very defensive without any, without attempting to counter at all, which I think can be an issue, and it can be something that guys can exploit to go out there and throw some flurries, get him backed up, and win some moments on the judges' scorecards, even if they're not landing that efficiently. But it all starts because of how focused he is on not getting hit to the head. Now we start this clip with Dominick Reyes applying some pressure, and Jon Jones gets so defensive that he's almost running away at the start. He does do a good job of moving his head and blocking shots. However, he provides no threat of a counter. Since he provides no threat of that counter, Dominick Reyes has no reason to do anything other than stand in front of him and throw punches as hard as he can, hoping to land one. He's not able to, but the threat of the counter can get rid of those big, big flurries. Now, this weakness also will allow him to get hit to the body. Since Jon is so focused on defending that head, it opens up body strikes. And I think that is some spots where we've seen guys like Santos, Reyes, and Smith all find some body shots because he keeps such a good defensive position to defend his head that it leaves the body open. And I think that is an area that people can find success, is attacking that body. Now we start this clip with Dominick showing Jon the shot upstairs, and then the next time he returns with body shots, we see Jon go to block the head, and Dominick Reyes lands 2 shots to the body. In this one, Jon and Santos are hand fighting a little bit. Santos throws a kick. Jon's got some good position on the head. He's even got the body blocked a little bit, but Santos still squeaks in that kick underneath his elbow. Now, the second and last weakness that I spotted for Jon Jones was very surprising to me. In his most recent fights, he hadn't looked as good going out and getting a takedown, right? And that can be very surprising because I think Jon Jones is known for someone with really good takedowns and great wrestling. And I'm not saying he doesn't have great wrestling, but he did struggle a lot more to go and get takedowns. And I think this can be fixed, honestly, but in order to do that, you have to refocus yourself on wrestling. You have to practice more wrestling, because simply, if you don't use your wrestling, you'll lose it. And I think that may have happened to Jon. I'm not saying he can't go out there and wrestle against Ciryl Gane or other future opponents, but I do think in the past, right, I can only go off the film that I saw, in his most recent fights, he didn't look as good at getting that takedown. And I was surprised by this, so I did look up his takedown accuracy over his 5 most recent fights to kind of ensure that my eyes were telling me the right story here. And in his last 5 fights, Jon has gone 6 of 26 for a 23% takedown accuracy. And I think that's kind of indicative of him not going out there and getting the takedown as efficiently as he has in the past. Because in the past, he's done much better. He's been much more efficient at getting those takedowns. And like I said, I think this can be fixed with some refocusing on wrestling. But most recently, we've seen him struggle a little bit more than you'd expect at going out there and landing an offensive takedown. After catching a knee, Jon has a really good single leg attempt here. But when he takes this to the ground, he falls off balance just a little bit, and then Gustafsson capitalizes with a crossface. Those 2 things make it a little bit harder for Jon to land this takedown. He works back to the feet. Once he gets this back to the feet, Gustafsson's able to get his leg to the inside, control that position, and then he does a good job of attacking with the front choke to get Jon off that takedown attempt. Now in this one, we see Jon shoot a blast double. Problem arises when Dominick Reyes is able to dig that underhook, right? He's able to drop that hand, get that underhook, and then when Jon goes to lift him up and go for the slam, Dominick Reyes pressures forward with the hips, digs up with the underhook, and Jon just cannot get him off the ground. All right, so when I'm looking at constructing a game plan for Jon Jones to win a fight, it starts with the kicks, right? He is so good at kicking his opponent and damaging their legs, right? And that really inhibits their movement and it allows him to more efficiently land strikes later in a fight. So I want to see him focus on landing the leg kicks, landing the oblique kicks, doing all those things. Additionally, similar thought process, kicking to the body. He has very, very good teeps and side kicks, and he'll mix in some roundhouse kicks to the body as well. But those do a similar thing where you can start wearing on your opponent through those body kicks. And at the same time, those leg and body kicks both set up the powerful head kicks. So I want to see him focus on the kicks and focus on wearing on his opponents through those kicks and damaging their movement and stamina by using the kicks. Off the back of that, Jon Jones has a very diverse offensive skill set that I think he should lean into, right? If I'm looking at the best tools for Jon's offense, it's the kicks, and then it's the elbows, and then it's the knees, and then it's the punches, right? Punches are probably his worst offensive tool. So I think he should lean into that and use the kicks and use the knees and use the elbow. You can't get one-dimensional if you're Jon Jones, because what makes Jon Jones so good is that he will go out there and throw these elbows and knees and kicks that are not as common, and that makes them harder to defend, especially since Jon is doing it at an elite level. And then in the clinch, I like Jon's clinch a lot. I think this is an area that he should look to focus on. Jon is very good at landing knees in the clinch, but he'll also mix in some knees to the head in the clinch. And lastly, his elbows in the clinch are very, very good. Whether that be just a simple over-the-top elbow or whether that be a spinning elbow, Jon is very good at slicing guys up in the clinch. So I want to see him get to the clinch and land some offensive tools, whether that be knees to the body or head or elbows. And if he can start finding some success landing some strikes in the clinch, that will also make it easier for him to land takedowns from the clinch. So I think that that is a leveled attack there where he can find success in multiple areas. And then lastly, I want to see him get back to those wrestling roots. And it's not because I think he needs to control fights on the ground, or it's not because I think he needs to, avoid striking with heavyweights, but instead, I just really, really think that Jon is one of the best guys in the world at ground and pound. When he gets guys on the ground, he's a very dirty guy when it comes to ground and pound. And not dirty in an illegal way. You could make the case that Jon is a dirty fighter in terms of eye pokes and things like that. But when he gets it on the ground, he'll cover your mouth with his hand, and it'll make it hard for you to breathe, and he'll throw knees to your body, and he'll throw elbows that really, really slice you up because he's got such long arms. He can throw elbows from crazy angles and crazy distances that just split you open. Very good submissions as well from the ground. So I think that Jon really needs to focus on getting that takedown because he is so efficient at just beating the crap out of guys with ground and pound that I feel like, that is an area where that's a spot where he can start to pull ahead, even in some of the most previous fights against guys like Santos, Reyes. Those are areas where that Reyes fight wouldn't have been as close if he could have gotten an extra takedown or two in the early rounds and started to land some of that vicious ground and pound that he has. That fight suddenly is not as close, and it's not going to be a controversial decision either way. So I would like to see him look to mix in some wrestling just so he can get to that ground and pound that he has. Okay, now, crafting a game plan to defeat Jon Jones. I start with almost the opposite of the way I started for the pro Jon Jones game plan. You got to kick him in the legs, right? He's got skinny legs. Go out there and damage his movement before he can damage yours. Damage his legs, and then hopefully that can, slow his kick game down a little bit, make him a little bit more hesitant to throw those kicks. So I think damaging his legs before he can do that to you is a very, very good start to beating Jon Jones. And then from there, I want to see the body attacks. Because I think if you can land some kicks to the body, land some hands to the body, start hitting him in the body, it can start bringing those hands down from his very, very good striking defense, right, and head defense. And then you can start to bring those hands down to look to defend the body a little bit better. And then that opens up your head strikes. So I think attacking the legs and body is good. Oh, and also with the body strikes, that cardio at heavyweight is going to be worth a test, right? Maybe it's as good as it was at light heavyweight, which would be astounding. But I think if you can at least test it, you got to at least test it and find out. See if you put that weight on the right way. You can tell very quickly into a 3-round fight, and you've been punching him in the body for the first 2 rounds. You enter that 3rd round, and you can really feel and see how that cardio holds up. And then obviously in the championship rounds, it would just be some additional onto that, where if you've been punching him in the body for 4 rounds, how's he looking at 5th? So I think that is a spot where you should focus and just see how he reacts with that cardio at heavyweight, and especially if you're able to land some body shots. And then from there, I would advise to have your own cardio prep to throw a lot of offensive strikes. When you look at guys like Reyes, who almost beat him, Reyes outvolumed him a lot, right? Reyes, especially in the early stages and the rounds that he definitely won, he was able to really outpace Jon Jones. And, even though he only landed a handful of strikes that were like, ooh, that's a really good shot, right? He lands a really good uppercut, but he doesn't land a bunch of offensive strikes that really make you jump out and go, oh, he landed that one. But he was out-throwing Jon and out-voluming him. And then that makes it look like he's winning. Even if he's not landing super efficiently, even if he's just, barely clipping him on the top of the head, or just, barely hitting him on the end of a punch, right? Those moments are stacking up because you're doing it frequently, because you're out-valuing him. I think that can be a good way to go out there and win some scorecards and win some rounds. So I would advise to out-value him. And then on the back of that, you can do that by blitzing forward, because as we established, he's not going to look to counter. So I think if you can get him moving backwards, get him defensive, that is the moment you pressure him in some chaos where he's moving, he's trying to defend. I think that is a good path. And then from there, if you're able to blitz him, get his back up against the fence. The one thing about Jon Jones is he will never sit up against the fence. And if he does, it's very rare. He's always going to be circling one way or the other to get off that fence. So once you're able to really push him back, that's when you start mixing in the kicks or hooks to the way that he starts to exit. So blitz with volume, get him up against the fence, and then hit him as he's trying to move off that fence, because he's going to try and move off the fence. Last thing, one more quick thing is punch through the feints or kick through the feints. We'll see often where Jon will pump out that jab, right? But he doesn't really throw that jab as much as you'd expect for someone who's constantly getting reactions on the jab feint. So what you need to do is you need to punch through that feint, right? Whether it's something simple like a leg kick. He's sitting out here pumping that jab and showing you that jab. Try and punch around that jab, punch through that jab, jab feint, or just kick him in the leg while he's looking to feint his hands. I think those are all some beneficial things that you can do that can put you on a path to success for defeating Jon Jones. Thank you for watching this film study on Jon Jones. If you enjoyed it, we've got a handful of others in the bank, whether that be fighters like Israel Adesanya, Glover Teixeira, Kamaru Usman, Alex Pereira, right? I've done a handful of these at this point, so there's quite a few fighters that you can go back on, and there's probably 1 or 2 that you will find interesting, so make sure to go check out some of the previous film studies. But most importantly, make sure you subscribe to Vendetta Sports Media on YouTube, and make sure you go visit the website vendettasportsmedia.com to read all the articles, not just MMA stuff, but there's also pretty much every other sport that you can think of on the website. So make sure you go check out that as well. But thank you for watching, and we will catch you next time.